Good day and greetings. This is Dr. Charles Cotter. I'd like to welcome you to episode 4 of the HRM Strategic Performance Advisor video series. Those of you that were able to watch the preceding 3 episodes, you'll recall the objective of this particular video series is to equip HR professionals with a toolkit to graduate largely from a level 2 of strategic maturity transactional to a level 4, in other words, to graduate to a strategic performance advisor. Therefore, one of the things that we need to get right is, of course, the operating model, and in particular, the viability, the feasibility, but also the sustainability, in other words, the future proofing of this operating model. What I'm going to recommend is what I call a ViSPA, a virtual strategic performance advisor model. And in particular, in episode 4, I'd like us to unpack the 4 key roles of this particular model with the functions contained within the anatomy of this model, but also look at the back end of this video clip. I want us to look at the time, but also the role allocation in order for us to effectively execute on this particular HR operating model. There's a lot of things that HR needs to transform. We've discussed that in the preceding episodes. There's a lot of things that we need to get right. And in particular, what we need to get right is the process, but also applying the right skills in the right manner, using the right methodology, fulfilling the right roles for the right reasons in order for us to achieve the right results. And one of the things that we absolutely need to get right is, of course, the HR operating model.
You cannot talk about strategic HRM if you don't have a viable, feasible, and sustainable operating model. So I'm talking about your HR operating model. Now we know that the old school Dave Ulrich HR business partnering model has become very contemporary, it's become very popular. I'm giving my age away now, but I remember when I did my honors degree at UJ in the late 1990s, the prescribed textbook was a book called HR Champions. Hopefully all of you have read the book. It's a seminal piece of work, and it's really where Ulrich popularized the concept of business partnering, and in particular, the HR business partnering model. What I'm suggesting as an alternative, as a derivative of that model, which I believe in, it's also a more modern model, because if I remember correctly, that model, the HR business partnering model of Ulrich, dates back to 1997. So we're talking about 24 years now. So what I've developed, and this is research-based, what I've developed is an alternative HR operating model. I initially called it the Strategic Performance Advisor model, but more recently, with the advent of this remote working culture, which has now become almost a hybrid working culture, I then rebranded it last year into a virtual strategic performance advisor model. You can abbreviate it, or the acronym is ViSPA. Because I do believe, Sarah Odwa, that a lot of the work of HR right now is being done remotely. We're offering this virtual strategic performance advisor service. And like you correctly said, we've got to graduate from HR being branded as being administrative to that support role, to an enabling role, and then ultimately a driver of business performance. So we don't have time to dwell on this, and I did give you a bit of literature in the learner manual. I've tried to give you a description of each of these roles. So I'm just going to very quickly unpack it. For me, the cornerstone of this virtual strategic performance advisor model is HR governance. This is the equivalent role to Ulrich that talks about the administrative expert. So I don't talk about administrative expert. I'm talking about an HRM governance role. You are an HRM governor. And if you have to unpack the specific functions, and this is what we're going to get to on Friday of this particular program, I often use the RED CAR acronym to describe this HRM governance framework. So you've got to look at risk, you've got to look at ethical leadership culture, you've got to look at creating workplace democracy, compliance. Of course, we know compliance is a very important outcome of governance, your auditing, and of course your reporting. So we don't have time to look at the full scope of your HR governance framework. So what I've done is I've deliberately selected your HR risk management at the front end of your governance value chain, but then also at the back end. So your risk management tends to be preventative and proactive, whereas your HR auditing, which we're also going to look at on Friday, that then speaks more to the reactive type of role. So I want us to look at the best practices in terms of governance, specifically focused on risk management and auditing. But you will see in my descriptors that the governance role is far wider than that but we have to exit this governance role. This for me is no better than level 1 of strategic maturity, and I'm going to be using these terms quite repeatedly over the next 3 days. This is where we say, Sarah Odwa, that the HR role is very traditional. It's that administrative type of role. We need to have a fully fledged and legitimate HRM governance framework. That would then enable us to graduate to a level 2 of this model. And the level 2 of this model, according to me, is what I call a workplace advocacy role. Again, the equivalent in the HR business partnering model of Ulrich, he talks about being an employee champion. I don't think HR is an employee champion. We have various stakeholders. Employees admittedly are an important stakeholder, but we need to balance the needs, the interests, expectations, and also the priorities of those other key stakeholders in particular. So again, we don't have time to dwell on this, but the workplace advocacy role, I've given you sort of a breakdown of what I believe this role entails. Tomorrow in particular, as part of this learning program, what we're going to focus on employee engagement, because I think for me, the important outcome, the strategic ambition is to create a culture of brand ambassadors. So I want us to discuss the HR role and contribution in that regard, but I also want us to look at talent retention. And in particular, I want us to align that with the Deloitte irresistible organizational model. But I do want us to create a culture of future fit employees. And I do want us to create, I think these are the strategic roles that we need to focus on, this culture of brand ambassadors. But that is the workplace advocacy role that we need to talk about. But that would be no better than a level 2 of maturity. When I talk about level 2, I'm referring to a transactional HR role. And I think this is, a few of you have already alluded to that. We need to graduate to level 3. The only way of graduating to level 3, where we can start influencing business intelligence, is where we are future-proofing not only the HR, but also the business operating model. And then we can start penetrating the organizational culture. This is, like we said, with level 3, we're transformational. And if you look at some of the descriptors, this is what we're going to look at first thing tomorrow: the HR scorecarding process, your HR metrics and analytics, this evidence-based human resources management philosophy, and also how we can start creating what I call a collaborative intelligence economy. In other words, this is where we harmonize human, artificial, but also business intelligence. And this is also where we troubleshoot. We provide innovative business solutions for key and burning priorities within the organization. So this would then be, if we have to quantify this, this would then be scoring between 65% through to 79% in your HR scorecard. And then, of course, you get to the most sophisticated level. The only way that we then graduate from this business intelligence role to the strategic HRM role, this level 4 of maturity, is then by going from descriptive and diagnostic analytics into predictive and ultimately prescriptive. We're going to talk about that in detail tomorrow, but it's very important that we start generating predictive, but also prescriptive analytics, because we said it in the quote earlier on, we have to start influencing key business decisions. And this is where we get to level 4. And this is the focus on day 1 of this particular training program. We spoke about it, Sarah Odwa, using strategy mapping, for example, to create those interdependencies, to create those synergies, to create those linkages, like you said, between the work of HR. And if you're using the balanced business scorecard, for example, show how the work of HR, in which we reside in the learning, innovation, and growth dimension, how that impacts on your customer perspective, how that impacts on your internal business processes, and how that ultimately impacts on the financial perspective. So we've got to be able to convert HR from being a cost center to HR becoming a profit center, where we do then show the financial benefits and value of HR. So even the metrics that we use at level 3, we've got to start looking at those human capital return on investment type of metrics, where we can show not only the strategic, but also the financial value proposition of HR. Again, I'm giving my age away, but one of the things that I do remember from the HR Champions book, and it's kind of prophetic, because if you think about what Ulrich said in 1997, it's still relevant in 2021. I remember from the book HR Champions, he said HR need to focus on 3 things. Number 1, we need to cut costs. Number 2, we need to innovate. And number 3, we need to add value. Think about it in 2021 and also looking to the future, how relevant those three achievements still are. Cutting costs, innovating, and adding value, and your operating model then enables you to achieve that. The roles that HR plays, typically we could be a reactor, we could be a partner, which is the focus of this particular training program, or we could be an anticipator. And you'll pick up over the next 3 days, one of the configurations that I absolutely love is a 70-20-10% model, which is a derivative of the 80-20% Pareto principle. So I believe, Manavriti, that 70% of the work of HR has to be this partnering role. And when you look at the descriptors, this partnering role, the HR strategy is embedded in the business strategy. We resolve talent issues. Remember, we spoke about being an innovative solutions architect. We also support the rollout of corporate-wide talent management initiatives. I think it's very important that in terms of the role allocation, that 70% of your role as a strategic HR business partner must be dedicated. I think Manavriti, you'll agree with me, must be dedicated to this partnering role. 20%, I believe, should be allocated to this anticipatory role. And you can look at some of the descriptors, but this is where we are more future focused. We're doing the environmental scanning. We are mindful of the talent trends, the current talent trends, but also the future of the workplace studies. And only 10%, exactly what you said, Manavriti, as little as 10% of the role allocation should be dedicated to this reactionary role, where we tend to be caught up in firefighting, in crisis mode. We tend to fixate on the administrative work, the support role. Take note of some of the terminology. We tend to fixate on compliance. Now, again, don't get me wrong. I did acknowledge that HR governance is the cornerstone. This administrative expert role is the cornerstone of strategic HR business partnering. But we need to somehow, and I think you'll enjoy the case study because the case study describes exactly what the company did to get the role allocation correct. But also, you've got to look at your time allocation. So the time allocation, now I love this model of Deloitte. We know that Deloitte are the global research, but also the thought leaders when it comes to strategic HRM. So I believe that we need to shift then from lag to lead performance indicators. And I love this model because they suggest then with this lagging, very your typical hierarchical, your pyramid structure, we've got to go from that to a diamond formation. We've got to go from a pyramid structure to a diamond structure. And Manavriti, exactly what you said. You've amplified planning. Have a look at the difference then when you have a lag structure relative to a lead structure, just in terms of planning. Planning in the lag structure is limited, where it's certainly extended and accentuated in this diamond formation, along with the most important, the bulk of your time then as a strategic HR business partner must be spent on consultation. And have a look at what we've done. We're not fixating on administration, procedures, and compliance. We're still doing that, the 10%. We're still doing the transactional, the traditional work of HR. I'm not saying neglect that, but what we've done is we've focused more on planning. We focused more extensively on consultation. And also the pinnacle of this model, you can see there is an increase. We now, Manavriti, we're focusing more on strategy. We're not just looking at functional and operational administrative work of HR. We're looking at the strategic work of HR. I think we need to, as part of the transformational change agenda, I think we need to change our role allocation. We need to change our time allocation. Also, we know with that traditional HR business partnering model, we might have to look at the structure as well.
In concluding episode 4 of the Strategic Performance Advisor video series, I'd just like to remind you of the 4 pivotal roles that we need to play in human resources management. You'll recall the cornerstone of the model is the governance role, and in this role, I believe that we are the sense maker. In the workplace advocacy role, we are either the deal or the peacemaker. In the business intelligence role, in which we need to generate the predictive but also the prescriptive analytics, we are the rainmaker. And the most prominent role is, of course, as the HRM strategist, as the strategic performance advisor, we are the kingmaker. We are the sense maker, the deal, the peacemaker, the rainmaker, and ultimately, when we graduate to level 4, we become the kingmaker. This is Dr. Charles Cotter signing out. I'd like to say thank you for your time investment in viewing the short video clip, which focused on the ViSPA, the Virtual Strategic Performance Advisor model, as an alternative to the traditional HR business partnering model, which I believe is certainly an impactful model that hopefully you will find significant value, and hopefully you can adopt it and apply it in your respective HR organizations. I'd also like to welcome you to subscribe to my YouTube learning channel. Also, if you enjoyed this video clip, please click on the like button. Please ring the bell for future notifications of uploading content. And just in that regard, I'd like to remind you of episode 5, which will be published tomorrow. And episode 5 will focus on the HR metrics and the HR scorecarding processes. I've also shared my contact details with you and also my social media footprint. So you'll find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and on YouTube, like I mentioned. Also Facebook, you're welcome to connect or follow. If you have any specific questions or comments, please post them in the comment section of this particular post. But also a free resource, my portfolio of SlideShare presentations. You'll find that on the SlideShare platform. Thank you, and I look forward to our next engagement for the remainder of the series, episodes 5, 6, and 7. Thank you.